I want to welcome everyone to our risk versus benefit, making the decision to join a clinical trial with our special guest, Cam. I'm sorry, Cam, I always do this with your name.
No,
Kambiz, right?
perfect.
Kambiz Roghanchi. Did I get that? Roghanchi?
Yes, but everyone knows me as Cam at MSU, so that's fine.
Cam is a wonderful volunteer for Myositis Support and Understanding, but he also has recently undergone this process of deciding to join a clinical trial. And as we like to put the patient's voice first and truly understand, he came to us with this great suggestion of let's talk about what the decision looked like and how it came about. So without further ado, I am going to spotlight Cam and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jess, so much for that introduction. And thank you all for coming. It really means a lot. So a little bit about me. I'm 23. I'm from New Jersey, about 30 to 45 minutes from New York City by train. And I grew up here. I have three older brothers. I'm the youngest of four. And I was a very healthy young man. And I, just had migraines, but, I was very active. And in 2021, and I started to develop rashes. Um, and I was in and out of the hospital. And as every single one of us has experienced the long road, on average 9 years to diagnosis. So I was diagnosed with many different things. I saw allergists. And it was when, in February of 2021, when I had Gottron's papules, that my dermatologist at Cornell ordered the biomarker panel that almost all of us have had. And I had a biopsy, and both came back positive for dermatomyositis. So from February 2021 to now has been really hard. And, we all, I think, go through this cycle when we have a really serious chronic illness like myositis, of grieving our past life. And it's a constant struggle. And I went on the dreadful prednisone, which helped a lot, but I also gained around 50 pounds. And I was on methotrexate. And, the past 3 years has been a barrage of medication. And with dermatomyositis, it's the only form of myositis that has a treatment, but it only has one FDA approved treatment, and that's intravenous immune globulin, Octagam 10%. And that's it. So the rest of the treatments, the DMARDs like Cellcept and methotrexate, Plaquenil, or hydroxychloroquine, those are all off-label. So there's like a lot of research in the medical literature to support them, but they're still being used off-label. So I was on IVIG. I have a port for about a year, and I stopped to go on Rinvoq, which is a JAK inhibitor. Ultimately, my dermatomyositis was out of control, so I went back on prednisone, and up until August of 2023, I was on IVIG. I couldn't tolerate the headaches. And one thing with me is, and all of us, is the IVIG was really interfering with my quality of life. So the going to the hospital for 8 hours a week and sitting in a chair with really bad headaches, and then often ending up in the ER and having to get really strong things like Dilaudid, it just wasn't feasible. Even though it was working, it wasn't feasible to the point where I couldn't live the life I wanted to live just to go and get IVIG so I don't have rashes. It was like no in between. So I made the decision to say, you know what, I want to join a clinical trial. I actually had made this decision before, many months ago, and I was ready and set, but I got too sick and I had to go back on IVIG. And this time in my life and this point in my life with dermatomyositis is perfect because my symptoms are not extremely bad and they're definitely not good. So I'm in a place where I can take some steroids and my CellCept and be okay, but still not be where I want to be. So I'm in that golden space of a clinical trial. So a clinical trial, and by the way, I just want to say that I have absolutely no connection to any pharmaceutical company, hospital, or anything. I just, love the myositis community and want to share with you. So a clinical trial, so this is a little generic, excuse me, but I think it's good information. What is a clinical trial? Clinical trials play an essential role in advancing medical knowledge and improving treatment options for various diseases. These trials involve carefully monitoring individuals who receive new treatments or interventions to evaluate their safety and efficacy. So when clinical trials offer potential benefits, they also have risks, right? And that's why I labeled the talk risk versus benefit. So understanding these risks is crucial for patients like myself. So like I said, often, the off-label treatments, they don't have a plethora of data or literature. So for example, rituximab or Rituxan is like huge for DM and some polymyositis, right? It's the go-to. And I actually was reminded my rheumatologist that there's only one paper, one study done by a university to say Rituxan helps with DM. So there's not this huge amount of research. So all of this came to a collage, and I made a decision to join a clinical trial. And so we went over that. And so what are the benefits of joining a trial? One, I think you get to really contribute to advancing medical knowledge. That's something that I, as a patient, struggled with because I said, well, a few things. One, okay, yeah, I'm advancing medical knowledge, but I'm going to participate for free, and a company is going to make quite a large amount of money. So am I really? The second, I was like, well, I don't want to sacrifice myself for the greater good because I don't want to get sick. But then I realized that really it doesn't have all that to do with the pharmaceutical company making money and the sacrifice. You're really living science as a patient when you participate in a clinical trial. That's what I felt. I felt like, well, I'm going to live science, right? Live a hypothesis, a theory, and the scientific method. I get to be a part of that. And you get to, help others with this really horrible rare disease. You gotta, sorry, forgive me. So you receive close monitoring, right? During a clinical trial, if you get a bruise, you really have to report it. So you're really closely monitored. You gain a sense of empowerment, right? You're helping the greater good of myositis. And then there are the risks. So here are the risks for me. This is what went on in my mind. I said, this is a double-blinded clinical trial, the one that I joined. And that means that a certain amount of people get the drug and then some get the placebo or a sugar pill. And the doctor, no one knows except some other people outside of where I'm doing the trial. So for 52 weeks, I could be getting sugar pills and get nothing. So that's a big risk. The pro is that I can stop at any time. The protocol also allows for steroids to be used cautiously. And it's like, okay, so for 52 weeks, I could get nothing. But if something happens, I can go right back on IVIG. Or I could get the real drug and get a lot better. With that, I do want to quickly go to Manuel Lubinus, who is the Chief Science Officer, PhD in immunology, and I think specializes in scleroderma. because he's very familiar with clinical trials. And Manuel, I was wondering if you could quickly explain the phases of clinical trials.
Yeah, I think it's relevant to your discussion, I think, because some people don't know. So I think clinical trials, they make pharmaceutical companies and take a number of years, right, to develop a drug from the stage, from the bench to actually give it to patients. So usually in phase one, there are three phases we talk about usually. A phase one, people actually will look at the dosage for like healthy individuals. So phase one is a very small number of people who are actually looking at the safety of the drug. They are healthy individuals and say, okay, this doesn't seem to have a lot of side effects. And then after that, in phase two, you are actually testing with patients and figure out, is this a dosage that could be used in patients? Has this some effectivity? Can we see some results based on that in a small number of patients, a little bit bigger than phase one? And then you make a decision, or at least the pharmaceutical make a decision, should they go to phase three? Sometimes you find that drugs go with phase two, phase three, so kind of they do both at the same time to kind of save and say, once you finish phase one phase, then you move immediately to the other phase. So sometimes that happens. And then after the drugs go out, then they actually measure in the general population what kind of other side effects they have, and they report that to the FDA. But I think to your discussion is important because a lot of money goes into the clinical trials, but at the same time, they depend on patients, and patients like us. I have IBM, and I don't have a lot of clinical trials compared to dermatomyositis. I think we have a lot of phase two and phase three clinical trials coming up in this area. So I think it's important for people to know the differences on that. But I think you talk a little bit about the benefits, and I was thinking, so there is the benefits in general, but I think, did you make that decision like, okay, in this one, I have IVIG and I have all these side effects, and then if I go into XYZ treatment, maybe I get an improvement, and then maybe quality of life. So how you measure that quality of life improvement when you're considering clinical trial?
Absolutely. So at the time that I made this decision, there were only two clinical trials. One of them was for an IV infusion. The other one was for an oral tablet. I looked rigorously. One of them was actually is a drug already on the market for myasthenia gravis. The other one, which I ultimately decided to join, was a novel drug. And I said, so I'm getting these infusions that I really hate. They're 8 hours a week. They're causing really bad side effects. And this drug is also an infusion, but it's once every 3 months for 30 minutes. And I looked at it, and I also looked at the data. So for that particular study, it would still be an infusion, and it would still require traveling. And even though the infusion is 30 minutes, there's a whole check-in and everything. It's like a 3-hour thing, and it would also be in the city. And then I looked at the other one, and it's a pill, right? So it's something that you can pop in your bag. You can take it, at home. There's no infusion, there's no IV. And for me, I said, that's something that inherently is already going to improve my quality of life, because this getting poked and getting an infusion, whether it be once a week or once every 3 months, it's very laborious. But if I have a pill at home, it's no different than all the other pills that I have at home.
So you have you have one that have a pill, and maybe that's better than the other one with infusion because it's a shorter period of time, and you have more flexibility, more compliance, and then that's better than just taking the IVIG, right? So because you are
exactly,
that's kind
exactly
of okay.
Yeah, and then the other thing was, I think anytime you are considering a clinical trial, you should do your own research even before talking to doctors. So what I did is I researched both drugs, and I came to the conclusion that the oral pill that I ultimately decided to join had much more data in the world of autoimmune diseases. And one thing that really stood out to me is that on my skin biopsy, there was the pathologist from Cornell says, blah, 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 upregulated, I think, type 2 interferon.
Yeah.
And then I went and I looked at the oral drug that I wanted to take, and it said, is the mechanism of action or how the drug works, all these different things. And it said, something blocking type, the same interferon that was found in my biopsy, right? So something that I know, I had a concrete fact that I have an upregulated type 2 interferon. And this drug, even though I might not get it, directly acts on that pathway. So go ahead.
But somehow you're lucky, right? Because you have a choice between two drugs, right? Sometimes people live in areas where you cannot choose one. So second, you can actually, you have some knowledge. You have a background in pharmacy, is that correct?
I do. I worked in pharmacy for 3 years. And so I have a lot of knowledge in the route of administration, mechanism of action, absorption, and all of this. And,
I'm an informed patient. You're an informed participant.
Right. I am. And that was something I'm very grateful for my education. I also, like you had briefly mentioned, I live 45 minutes by train, maybe an hour, even shorter, depending on traffic, from New York City, which has 4 of the best hospitals in the world. So this place, New York City, you don't, if something happens, no matter how rare, there's someone in New York City who can treat that very well. A lot of myositis patients with dermatomyositis live hours and hours and hours away from university medical centers. So another thing that was deterrent to me, and I think as patients holds a lot of us back, is the cost. So you never, in the United States, you don't get paid to participate in any clinical trial, but you can get reimbursed. And that becomes problematic because a lot of us, including myself, are on disability, and that's not that much at all. So parking in New York City at the hospital where I go to, it's around $30. Tolls are around $30. You have something to eat in the city, it's $15. And so it's like a $75, $100 day. Now you get reimbursed, but that's really different. And everyone knows you get reimbursed. And, well, they're still deterred. But why? Well, because many of us don't have a sufficient amount of income because we're really sick. We can't work. So we're paying and then we're waiting weeks and weeks and weeks to get reimbursed. So that's something that I actually, I reached out to and fuel, instead of me paying and keeping the receipt, why can I have a voucher for the parking? Can I have a voucher for the hospital cafe? So that's something I also considered. The other thing was when the biggest thing also was speaking to my doctors. These are people that I really trust. As patients with rare diseases, the relationship between us and our physician is so sacred, right? You have to have such a big deal of trust, a huge amount of trust. And I do feel confident in saying personally that not all physicians are equal. There are some doctors who are better than others. And there are some doctors who, I think with our disease, I think everyone, but with our disease, we have to be very picky when we're seeing a specialist or doctor. I have great trust in my rheumatologist and my neurologist. And I talked to them and they told me, and I know they would always be honest with me, and they said, I do think that at this point, this is the right option to join this clinical trial. So that kind of sealed the deal for me. When my own doctors told me, so in my mind, I'm saying, I'm not happy. I'm not happy taking 3 huge tablets of mycophenolate or Cellcept in the morning and 3 huge tablets at night, getting all this weight from steroids. So if there's something that could possibly be only, a pill a day that could be very life-changing, what's the harm?
So did you make the decision first, or your doctor told you about the clinical trials and then you thought about that? Or how did it work?
So I made the decision first of all. Through MSU, I found out about clinical trials, and talking with you too, you're very, of course, extremely knowledgeable. And but like I said, when I talked about PK physicians, all of my physicians are very academic, especially my rheumatologist. So she knew, and I have 2, they knew every trial, right? And the drug that I'm participating in is also now there's a study for systemic lupus erythematosus, and so they knew already, and we talked about how that class of drugs is the new frontier in rheumatology. So the one I decided, another factor that made me feel confident, was that the same class, right? The one I'm doing is like a JAK-TYK2 inhibitor. There are many, many drugs on the market for autoimmune diseases that are used all the time with great success. And my doctor said to me, this is the future of rheumatology, it's this class of drugs. So I went to her and said, listen, what do you think? And she told me, I do think this is the right step.
So this is a good question. Opens out another question, I think, on this topic, because already there are some other drugs in the market. So I think the difficulty sometimes is to get approved for those drugs, right? Because that's another one. So there are some inhibitors in the market, there are some inhibitors, but actually it's not so easy to get the...
Not at all.
Right.
And I think, and especially I, like many of us, have Medicaid. All insurance, and I think we all know this as patients, I feel confident for saying, and this isn't political or anything, but we know insurance are horrible. They're really not good people. They don't want to cover anything. So so these really great JAK inhibitors like Rinvoq, which I was on, and it had quite a bit of effect. No way they were going to cover it. So I had to apply through the assistance program through the pharmaceutical company. And my doctor had to say, right, and, I personally think this is ethical. She did have to say I have rheumatoid arthritis, which we all know with dermatomyositis, the arthritis we have is pathologically almost identical to rheumatoid arthritis, right? So she said that the drug got covered. But you're right. I mean, when you have something that's off-label, that's a very expensive drug, good luck getting it covered.
So maybe it's a good point to see where are you in the process, right? Because we know that there is different things that happen when you join a clinical trial, and maybe that's something that people like future participants will appreciate to know what happens after you say, okay, yes, and then you go and fill your form, in the website, and then all of a sudden you get a call, whatever. So maybe you can describe a little bit the process on what's happening.
Yeah. So when you join a clinical trial, so I'll tell you how I did it. When I first inquired about the other drug, right, the infusion, the pharmaceutical company really wasn't very patient friendly. So I stopped right away. I wasn't interested if they weren't interested. Now, the one I was interested in, the oral pill, how it worked was I had reached out through the website. I also, through MSU, had known the person recruiting because we got a lot of educational Zooms. What had happened next was, so I reached out and we talked, we had a phone call. And then from that phone call said, okay, you sound like you're eligible. Then what happens is you have to send over, and they take care of it too. You have to send over copious amounts of records. So I sent in all my records for the past 4 years.
Can you use my chart or something that you have to?
Exactly. I used my chart. And luckily, I consider myself a very informed patient, so I have all of my records already. So what you do is I send all the records, their team combed through it. They came back to me the next day with 50 or 60 questions. Do you still take cyclosporin? Why did you take cyclosporin? And then on my chart, sometimes it says really crazy things. So one ER visit, the doctor mistaked my dermatomyositis for scleroderma. So he says, patient presents with scleroderma. They called me, they said, do you have scleroderma? I said, no, I don't have scleroderma. So that kind of stuff. And some of the stuff they ask is, at first it's a little strange. So they said, can you tell us more about why you take antidepressants? Because when you go in the trial, if something happens, so they really ask really in-depth questions. From there, we went to the washout period, and that's the period that becomes really difficult.
Yeah, so I think we need to define what the washout is. You want me to give a chance to that? So when go, either you're taking a current medication, so it needs a period where you are going to basically clean off of that medication in your blood, so the effects of the new drug are going to be measured from there. So you start from like week 0 after that. So you have a washout. How long is the washout, or how long will be the washout period be? Sometimes it's 8 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks.
So the washout period for me for this trial of IVIG was 3 months since the last infusion. The washout, because I was on a JAK inhibitor,
Right.
that washout was 3 months, so I could do them together. And the issue I had is, and a lot of people have, is can you make it through the 3 months, right?
Right.
That's why such a small amount of people, the disease is already so rare. Then you have all these requirements. People, don't want to do it, and then you have to stop everything for 3 months to get it out of your system.
And that's it, because you had symptoms, you were taking IgG. So I think when you consider it's almost like you are for sure you're getting nothing at this time. So you are almost you are passing by, like trying to stay safe from any symptoms, right? Yeah. So
right.
How was that? Is that a process that is a bit kind of mentally challenging to do that, or what?
It really is. It really is, because you have to, at one point during the washout, I went to the emergency room because my rash was so bad, and I was very emotional and I was crying, and the nurse asked me, and I said, if you give me above 250 milligrams of IV solumedrol, methylprednisolone, I'll be booted from the trial. And I've gone 2 months, I have 1 month to go. So it's very taxing, because you have these symptoms and you can't go. Right, for all of us, steroids are really our big rescue. They have such strict rules in the trial about leading up to randomization, and randomization is the day. Could you explain the day of randomization real quick?
Yeah, so randomization is when basically the patient is assigned to either receive the drug versus a comparator that is a placebo. So you have the drug usage, or you are randomized to receive that, depending on different clinical trials and how many patients are recruiting. So sometimes they have a smaller arm of a placebo, and they have 2 arms of the drug at different doses. So that's basically it. So basically what happened is you are being basically aleatorily, so by random, you are selected to be in one group or the other, and then you have to live with the consequences of that, right? So, and then you decide at the end after that, what did you get? Sometimes you don't know. And then you're hoping, at least if you didn't get the drug, you're going to get the placebo effect, for you believe that the drug will work for you and get
right.
better.
And while you mentioned the placebo effect, something that went through my head, and I was like, well, what if I get the placebo and I get better? Then people are going to think I'm making it up. They're going to think I'm crazy. And I said to my rheumatologist, right, who again, I'll reiterate, for us, it's so important to have such trusting relationships with our physicians. And I said to her, Dr. Gutman, what if I get the placebo and I'm better and my rash starts to get away? I said, you're going to think I'm crazy. You're going to think I'm making it up. And she said, if that happens, first of all, it's good. And it happens all the time. She sees it with patients with such bad lupus. She can't control it. And they start to feel a little better. She doesn't think twice of it. I asked my neurologist. She said, it means nothing, right? It's something that we know works, sometimes a placebo effect. So I got calm about that, right? I got worried that people are going to think I'm crazy. They say, you've been getting the placebo. And meanwhile, I'm saying, oh, I'm feeling great at this and that. So, the other thing is, well, what's the harm of the placebo effect, right? We want to if we get better and we're not getting the drug, we're still getting better. There's no harm. And science tells us rigorously that the body and the brain are connected, and especially in autoimmunity, right, where the number one, sending people into flares, stress, and then vice versa. When you're flaring, you have stress. So if that stress is lowered and you're getting better, well, I thought to myself, well, what's the harm? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But lasting through the washout was really difficult, but I found a stable dose of steroids, of prednisone, and I'm randomized next week. So I made the 3 months.
I see Jessica is clapping, so that's good. I see. So that's kind of getting through the process, right? So
that's a big deal. Congratulations, being 1 week away from that randomized and making it through that washout period. And I think that's really encouraging for everybody who's listening. and who sees this, because you had an ER visit during the washout. You were able to get what you needed to help control the rash without getting you outside, getting you rejected from the clinical trial. And so that's why this is so important, so that others can hear your story and go, look, hey, Cam made it those 3 months. He got off of the IVIG, he got off of the mycophenolate, and was able to make it to randomization.
Right.
You can do it. It's possible for anybody.
Right. And thank you, Jess. That means a lot. And you're right. We can do it. And why it's so important is because we live with such a nasty, evil disease, dermatomyositis, and there's no really, IVIG. So there's no really, you see so many treatments for RA, right? Crohn's disease. We don't have any treatments that are like, first of all, approved, specifically engineered for the disease. And that won't happen unless we join trials. There's no way it will happen. So it's something that I really hope, and I hope this presentation will help getting myositis patients. And at the time, like I said, there were 2. There are now 6 trials. And there's one, I don't know if it started yet, for sporadic inclusion body myositis, but
yes, that's a phase 2 is going into phase 3, right? So yeah, that's another one.
Right.
And some of the other ones are also have antisynthetase syndrome as well as necrotizing myositis in addition to dermatomyositis. So we have a good number of trials that are going to come on. So I think that process, that decision process that you read, I thought it was, for me, it's interesting to see all the different levels that you took this very seriously on how to decide how to get into the trial, and you have all these discussions. So I think, do you think that that's it? So would you say this is a checklist if you are considering a clinical trial because you are really not satisfied with the symptoms and the quality of life? This is kind of your checklist of things that you have to do. Like, is kind of the process?
So, yeah. Manuel, I would agree with you. I would say that's an expert analysis, and it's whether you accept. I personally will not accept. I don't want to have horrible malar rashes. I don't want to have joint inflammation where I have to take really strong pain medicine. So I'm not going to accept that. And it's like, if you are satisfied with, having treatment to take you down from a 10 to a 6, that's okay. For me, though, I'm not satisfied at being at a 6. I want to be at a 1, 2, maybe a 3. So that was, part of my checklist. I'm not satisfied. And if I can do something that will satisfy me, for me, it's worth it. And it is worth, too, again, I really love science. And it does feel pretty cool, I have to say, to be living science, to be a test subject, to help really advance the field of medicine. And I really hope that, more people, and like I said, I've reached out. One thing that's good is we're kind of like, we do get a kind of a red carpet treatment, because it's so hard to find people with the disease. Then it's very hard because they don't want to join because they're really sick. Then people who do apply, they have to be like perfect and meet all these protocol standards. So you get treated well. And I reached out today to the institution where I'm doing the trial. And I said, listen, I'm coming in next week. This is something that's pretty bothersome to me. And from what I hear, a lot of dermatomyositis patients, I understand that I can keep the receipt and get reimbursed, but it would be much, much more feasible for me if you could find a way where my parking could be, since it's part of your institution, I could have a voucher, it could be paid for ahead of time. And if I could have like a, gift certificate or a voucher to the cafe, I'll submit my tolls, but this is something that's going to make it more feasible for me. And they got right back to me. They said, we're going to talk to administration today. We'll have an answer for you in the next 2 days. So I'm hoping that as patients, our voices we can say, listen, you want us in the trial, but it's not working this way. Can you make these adjustments to make it work? And that's what I did today. And I do think that the more we talk about clinical trials, the more we give feedback on clinical trials, the closer we'll be to having treatments for myositis, and specifically right now, dermatomyositis.
Yeah, I think it's critical, and I think thank you, Cam, for bringing all this time, because I think you have really kind of pointed out all the different issues, all the kind of reflection points where we are actually having issues, right? Because I think pharmaceuticals don't realize that diseases like dermatomyositis are diseases like totally kind of interrupt your life. And then all of a sudden, so you cannot do anything. You don't have the financial burden of the disease is such that affects you everything. And then unless people understand those conditions, they don't really know how easy it is to join a clinical trial or not. Also, you don't live in a metropolitan area. You live somewhere in like, let's assume like in the middle of Wisconsin or Georgia. It's difficult to access these clinical trials because you're never going to make it, even if you are the ideal candidate, right? So
and the contract, I signed a contract that was saying, well, if you live far away, we'll reimburse this and this. No one's going to pay $500 for a flight to wait a month to get reimbursed. It's not feasible. So I'm hoping these things can change. I have faith that they will change, because they need us, and we got to work out, a feasible way to have, we at MSU are patient-centered. Clinical trials have to be patient-centered. They have to be very friendly to the patient, and there needs to be some adjusting in that. And like I said, I really hope that more people from hearing me, can enter into the living science or the living medicine, have the discussion with their physician, and hopefully maybe consider joining a clinical trial. And I think that's what I wanted to say. Manuel, do you have any other questions?
So I think I will close saying something very important is happening next year. We are going to have a session in front of the FDA, specifically about dermatomyositis. So this is called a externally led patient-focused drug development, where we hope to have at least 400 patients in the audience, and we are going to be discussing the dermatomyositis symptoms that make the quality of life what we know what it is and what you experience. And also we're going to talk about clinical trials and some of the issues that the patients have with clinical trials and getting into clinical trials and kind of deciding if they should join or not a clinical trial, knowing all the things that you have already enumerated. And I think those are make a story for somebody who I really would like to do, but I cannot because I have to work. And if I get sick one day, I don't get paid. And I still have to be sick. So I think we're going to be discussed. This meeting is going to be on June 7th. It's a Friday next year. But we'll send all the communications to MSU. And this is something that we organize along MSU and TMA. So we work together to actually bring that, because I think we have discussions with different opinion leaders and doctors and say we really need to have this discussion about having effective treatments for this condition and having clinical trials will reflect this, both in the endpoints and things like we consider for more clinical trials to be successful. Because as you mentioned, we only have one, and all the other ones have failed. And many times we have to use the other drugs, which sometimes they work, and then we use it in patients, but we're trying to do better. So MSU is very committed to have this, educate, engage, and participate from all the members in the community. So I think this is kind of the first kind of discussion about this and how important this is to be an advocate. When you have a rare disease, it's not your doctor's disease, it's your disease. You almost have to own it, right?
Absolutely. And to close, I'll also say that I emphasize the importance of trusting and talking to your doctor. And then you should also, of course, it's ultimately going to be your decision, of course, but you should also ask people you love and who know you and know your disease. So around you, I'm very fortunate. I'm very close with my family. My brother is becoming a physician, so I would, ask him quite a bit. And that was very important feedback for me, but ultimately it was my decision. But it is joining a clinical trial when you have a really rare disease that really affects your life. It's a constellation of things that have to be right to join the trial, right? It's hard. And and I hope I can start answering some questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to open it up. We did not have any questions come in during the presentation, but I think that's probably because you did such a fantastic job of covering the material. But I do want to see if anybody has any questions for Cam at this time. You're more than welcome to put it in the chat. Or as I said before, you could raise your hand. You do this by clicking on the reactions icon and then clicking on the little raised hand, and it will raise your hand and then we can call on you.
Just a quick question from my side. I wanted to know how much pain do you have? Like, pain in dermatomyositis. Is a
Physical pain?
physical pain, yeah.
I have quite a bit, and it came later in the disease, and it's so variable. So one thing, I'm a very big advocate for pain management and palliative care. For a year, I was really not, I was in so much pain, and I know many of us have the dreaded, so many doctors throw gabapentin or pregabalin at you, meloxicam, celecoxib, and I was in so much pain, and I was slathering myself with diclofenac gel. But to answer your question, Manuel, my pain is very bad, but it fluctuates. So I started palliative care almost a year ago. It's very life-changing. Palliative care does not mean you're dying. It's just symptom management for people who have serious illness. And I started on a much more powerful medication. And what?
I'm sorry, that was my bad.
No problem. I started on much stronger medicine, an opioid, and I know a lot of us take those. And it's monitored very closely. We have discussions, so that helps, right? But it is a crutch because it would be so much, and that's another thing that drove me to join the trial, because I have this medicine, but then when it gets really bad, the pain, I have to go to the emergency room, get dilaudid, and which is, it's all just covering up the disease of dermatomyositis. So, that's the other thing with a new treatment. If it works, ideally, it stops the pain too, and then you don't have as much of a need for other medications.
That's fantastic. We do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So Lindsay's asking, she says, first, thank you for sharing your story. She says, at the beginning, you mentioned something that your doctor pulled alongside with your biopsy, something with markers. And what was that specifically?
I'll tell you right now. And that's the thing, I keep all my files, right? So I'll do derm biopsy.
Is that the interferon beta receptor? I don't know.
It was a upregulated, I think, type 2 interferon.
Yeah.
And would you mind very briefly explaining what an interferon is, Manuel?
Well, it's confusing. So you have cells, and then you have cells that secrete different proteins, and these proteins are part of the inflammation and are part from the body to defend itself. So interferon is one of those drugs or substances secreted by the cells. They're actually part of the cytokines, and then actually have an inflammatory effect. They are able to attract more cells to the inflammation area. So think about always, like, the body is trying to fight infection. So you always want to recruit more soldiers. The soldiers are the cells. At the same time, some of the proteins that these cells secrete, like the macrophages, they actually fight infection because they're able to actually find a ways to kill the germ by helping the other cells to use that as an entry point. So it's really like a very good defense system for the body. But when it's not immune, is something that attacks your own body. So you have to see that. And what you find sometimes in patients with dermatomyositis is this type of interferon beta-2 receptor, and then you are able to see that marker, and then you are able to see that the cells are actually have a bigger representation of that in dermatomyositis.
Thank you. And Lindsay, I'll tell you, so it's a type 2 upregulated interferon. and some other words I can't pronounce, but that's it. It was an upregulated interferon, and I think that's like what Manuel said, but that's what it was in the biopsy.
Yeah, so I think that in paper, sometimes you have drugs that should work on that, but still you need to do the clinical trial to figure out if it actually will work.
Right.
And you have to go through all the process and make sure they don't have side effects and what happened in that condition. And sometimes what working in mice also is not necessarily going to work in human. So all those type of things. So
here, I just looked it up. So specifically, Lindsay, there is some myovascular ECTASIA, Manuel.
I don't know if I know that.
But I was talking about was okay. And so it was an immunoassay, which is a stain. The surrogate type 1 interferon marker MXA is slightly upregulated in the endothelium of a few vessels. So yeah, the surrogate type 1 interferon MXA, Lindsay, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, so there are different markers. People study different ones. I look at the overexpression of that. So every person with the disease may have a different expression sometimes. So we are not at the level where we can actually say for that specific drug, we can use certain drugs or that specific type. I didn't ask you, you have a specific antibody. I forgot to ask that in the beginning.
Yes, I have anti-Rho 52 KT and RNP.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have more kind of, yeah.
And for those of you that are not understanding what maybe just was said, so typically when you are diagnosed with myositis, they will run what's called the myositis antibodies panel. And what that is there are known autoantibodies that they may show up in your blood work. And what those can do is they can tell sometimes the different types of myositis, but they could also indicate other areas where you could have issues. Some indicate interstitial lung disease is a possibility. Some have a higher cancer possibility. So when you hear us talk about the antibodies that you test positive, that is what we're talking about. However, some people don't have any autoantibodies ever show up in their blood work. That does not mean you don't have myositis. It just means they haven't found your autoantibody yet.
Right.
And they're constantly discovering new ones. It's a happening process. The more that they dig into myositis, the more we learn, the more is uncovered. So I just wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about that. And then I just wanted to say that there was a message in the chat that said you had an excellent point about the voucher payment. She's lucky that the clinical trial she's on pays a gift card for each time they walk in, and that's fantastic. And it again leads to this point of your voice matters. So make it heard.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This went really, really well. And I'm really excited to see, more patients hopefully go down the route or at least explore the route of clinical trials, and have a voice too when you consider or join a clinical trial. And I think that this was a good first step, and I'm very excited to see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam.
Well, thank you so much, Cam, for being willing to come and talk and share your experiences. And you're getting a ton of love and thank yous in the chat. And thank you, Manuel, for being here tonight and asking some really great questions. It was a wonderful MSU tag teamed event. And thank you guys for sharing with me. And thank you, everyone who joined.